Okay, we're going to move on to the next section, and this one is called "And the Award Goes to ... And it kind of builds on some of the questions we've already been asking. Can AI really do something creative and award-worthy, or do the creative industries present the greatest challenge for AI? This session is going to consider if AI can really become the author and take a leading role in creativity, and if so, where they figure on the credits, kind of going in a little bit around IP there, around who actually owns creations, who can be the ones that are actually credited for creating things into the world. So I'm really excited to hear what these guys have to say. I'm going to introduce the final two panelists, or a panelist in a chair, to come join Chanuki and Michiel on the panel. First of all, we have Professor Dave Bull. He's the chair of signal processing at the University of Bristol, having previously been a lecturer at Cardiff University and a systems engineer for Rolls-Royce. He's worked widely in the fields of image and video processing and video communications. And our chair for the panel is Professor Darren Cosker. He's Professor in Computer Science at the University of Bath. Darren has expertise spanning computer vision, computer graphics, AI, and he's interested in any problem involving understanding and modelling data. He's currently director of the Centre for the Analysis of Motion Entertainment Research and Applications, beautifully named CAMERA as the shortened form. And this is a research centre applying computer vision and graphics, HCI, machine learning across sport, biomechanics, and the creative industries. Please give a warm welcome to Darren and Dave, who are going to be joining for this panel.
Okay, hello. Thanks for the introductions. First thing I'm going to do is wrestle with two apps, two kind of iPads I've got in front of me. Just for a second, this one. I don't know whether, okay. So, welcome to the session. I think this should be an interesting session and pull together some of the discussions we've already had. People have been sending questions in, and this is why I've got this app in front of me. So apparently there's a way of the audience. This is the kind of session, I think, where people are going to have questions and going to want to have opinions. So there is a way of doing that, and these questions will pop up on this app, so I can ask these questions to the panel. But just to start off by with some context for this session. So AI and whether AI can be creative is certainly a kind of a hot topic. And a little bit of background. So I was it's in a coffee session at the Digital Economy event, talking to Andrew Chitty. He's probably near somewhere. And I was talking about the fact that, I'm not sure how many people know about this, but in the United States, there's a separate Academy Award for science and technology. I don't know how many people know that. There's a completely separate session which runs, and it's at a completely different venue from the Oscars. So we know the Best Visual Effects Oscar, but in this session, they're called the Sci Tech Awards. There are about 10 Academy Awards given just for technical achievement in movies. So that might mean a bit of software which helped create a digital human, or a bit of technology which helped you rotoscope some actor. So this is clearly AI, at work already. And we thought it'd be, it's kind of an idea that we thought where, maybe BAFTA would have something similar one day. Wouldn't it be a great idea if BAFTA had a separate BAFTAs for science and technology, where we could kind of award all these all these technical innovations and achievements in the creative industry? So this kind of led on to then Andrew kind of saying, oh, wouldn't it be great then, to have a session the award goes to, and so whether we can, we can push a button and we can have AI to create something. So we're kind of, building on that idea that AI can be an assistant, but also then AI could be completely creative. So the broad brief of today is, can AI really become the author and take a leading role in creativity? Where would they figure on the credits? And what I'm going to, AI is kind of interesting. I think we've already, the first speaker already talked about the fact that AI has a reputation. Someone already said this is the killer robot session, right? But AI can have a reputation for, or have hype, if you like. What can AI do and what it can't do? So I think, if you give an AI guidance, if you give it examples of paintings or images, it can generate things for you, and it can kind of be creative for you. But I think what we want to explore, so we want to explore that. What are the boundaries and the limitations of AI, and what's the reality? So we'll be a bit technical. So already we've had some technical speakers today, and we've got 2 of them here, and I think that'll be great. But we want to also get to grips with, can AI also truly understand, for example, what's beautiful? And I think Chanuki mentioned the idea of beautiful. And I guess the challenge really is this is largely subjective. We can say to a computer, this is beautiful, this is not. Now tell me what's beautiful. But can it create something beautiful? Can it do something really, can it do something without direction, something original from scratch? And I think that's where we're going to kind of start off the discussion today. So I want to cover this, I want to cover the limitations, and then we've already heard about bias. I want to kind of talk about bias and whether or not there'll be the influence on bias in the creative industries and AI, and then at the end, then threats and opportunities of AI. So we've already had introductions. So I'm going to start off then with a kind of broad question for the panel. And the first question is, it's going to be an open question, so anyone can kind of answer this one to start with. So can AI be creative? And are the creative industries the biggest challenge for AI? So I'll kick off with that.
I can attempt at answering that question. So can AI be creative? I think one of the things we have to keep in mind first is that what it means to be creative is already very unclear, even for humans. Like, what is it going on in our brains when we are creative is sort of still an open research project. But I think that there's certainly several steps that are involved when we create a creative work, whether it be a song or a painting. Okay, so the first thing is probably that you're going to learn what's already out there. Say we're making a song. You're going to listen to a lot of music, and you're going to learn maybe about music theory, and there's going to be knowledge in your head. Okay? And then a second step that we can do is we can take existing knowledge and sort of combine ideas that we've already heard into something that we haven't heard yet. So we can combine the 2 existing ideas and sort of interpolate them in the middle and create something new. Or we can take an idea that we know of and extrapolate from it, put it in a new perspective, put it in a new light. Sort of take an existing piece of music, but change the rhythm, change the pace, change the feeling. Okay. And then there's a third part where, okay, we now have this creative work, but we've probably made it to convey a certain message. Or we want a certain piece of music to evoke a feeling in whoever's listening to our work. And I think the first 2 steps are things that AI can definitely do. AI can definitely take in data, take in all the music in the world, and internalize it in some way. It can definitely take these ideas and extrapolate from them and generate new songs. I mean, this is happening today. But I think the very hard part is then, how do you take that randomly generated music and make it useful? Make it actually mean something. And I think that is the challenge that we haven't really tackled yet. We still have to sort of guide the AI, and we can have it generate random music, but we still have to pick the bits and pieces and then put them together to convey the message that we want. So is creativity the first 2 steps, or do you need all 3? Do you actually need to convey a message in order to be creative? That's sort of where I stand at the point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think at the moment, we're probably at a point where AI can inspire creativity because it can kind of combine things in a way that you might not see in a novel way. And then that might inspire a musician or an artist, go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should then approach my creative problem like this. But at this moment, the algorithm doesn't actually know if when it's created something new, whether it's actually any good. It's just done it, and then it's still up to us to kind of do the final tick box. Now, I don't think it's impossible to do that I don't think we don't have the technology yet, but I don't think it's impossible. So unfortunately, I think the creative entities are going to be challenged, because I think it is coming, I don't know when, because I think it's technically possible, but we just don't have it right now.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think the creative industries is probably one of the most challenging of systems, maybe kind of paralleled by autonomous vehicles and driverless vehicles and things like that. I mean, I come from very much a background of solving what you might call assistant-based kind of solutions, working with creatives. I work with people like Netflix and Google to do kind of rate point, dynamic optimization for streaming of content, and enhanced compression techniques using AI to do kind of perceptual optimization of those. And those are kind of very constrained, and actually, we can get huge successes. And if you look at the whole kind of image understanding area, AI has kind of driven error rates down from maybe kind of 20-something% down to kind of 2%. Now, that's fine as long as you can kind of tolerate the 2% error. So it depends what you're looking at. And now the other approach is obviously creating content where you're giving perhaps a whole range of different experiences and examples. And you, as been said, as you extrapolate those or you interpolate between them. I mean, kind of the assistant thing is really just a black box where it's a very data-driven solution. You've usually got some kind of ground truth that you can hone that, you can converge that data. You've got an objective function where you know what you're trying to kind of optimize, or you perhaps put that black box with a human in the loop, which is more often the case perhaps in the creative sector, where there is kind of directorial control, or there's someone in a kind of post-production suite or doing acquisition where they kind of know what they want, and you're giving recommendations, or obviously recommendation services and things like that. I mean, the creative, if you're looking at real creative processes, what is it that makes humans creative? What is it on the other end of the consumer that makes people kind of enjoy what they're consuming? And it's kind of based on a lifetime experience of things you like, you don't like. You're creating something, you're kind of thinking outside the box. And AI systems at the moment are not particularly good at thinking outside of the box. It's the what-if questions that we can all kind of pose from things that are in kind of bizarre spaces in our mind that come together that do this. And I think we are a long way off. Even kind of thinking of the brain as a predictive system. AI systems are not particularly good at kind of thinking so much in that way, although those are coming. I mean, there are areas where, kind of grey areas where, there are creative aspects, and we've heard some of them in the talks, where the creative kind of spark is there, but it's perhaps inspiration, or it's giving examples. And there are things like, you might be creating complex worlds where you want to ensure kind of consistency or interactions with characters within those worlds, or you might, there's work by a company called Fable where creating kind of characters, whether it's kind of Harry Potter or someone else, and actually personalizing that, so the character is Harry Potter, or it's not Harry Potter, but that's just an example, where then you have your Siri system that's basically kind of Harry Potter, so you get some kind of interesting, and the system can learn your desires and kind of adapt itself within that character space. So the kind of things that are, that would be considered to be very, very creative, but actually they're not the kind of the whole process at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an important point. I think in this first part, it'd be really good to kind of drill down into a little bit about what we mean by creative as well. We've already said, Michel, you've already said that you can take two examples of something and you can interpolate something else, right? So, is that actually being creative? Is that something? So you're always ending up with something which is a kind of a mixture of things you've already seen. So is that original or not? And then, Dave, you've mentioned, already you've kind of alluded to examples where AI is acting like an assistant. And I think, so we have different ends so for me, there's different ends of the spectrum. There's still the I guess it's kind of the question of what does it mean to be an author then? And actually all the different ways you can be creative. So, can you so coming to the Scriptbook example, if you're on the you're assessing whether something is good as a script. Could you, from a generative point of view, one task might be one holy grail might be press a button and write a Booker Prize-winning novel, or predict whether something's going to win that prize. I mean, and on the other end of the spectrum, I could be working in a video game company and painting textures for I don't know, curtains or chairs or something. I mean, that is also a creative task. So I guess, this thing about what it means to be creative is also we need to kind of start to have some granularity, right, and look at the kind of things that we can create, and then we could say, yep, all those are in one box, we can do that, and these are the really big challenges. So I wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on the difference in challenge between the big grand challenges and then the kind of the little ones, and what's achievable and what's kind of so I guess are there any kind of starting with the lower hanging fruits? What are the kind of things maybe controversial? What are the things that we maybe think are more achievable?
Maybe like I don't think we're immediately within 5 years going to be pressing a button and generating a fully featured movie that's going to win an Oscar, because there's a very different task in seeing a movie and deciding yes, this is an Oscar-worthy movie, than doing the whole other process around. I mean, this orders of magnitude more complex. And whether even pressing a button and saying, okay, I'm going to generate a successful movie is a very ambiguous task, because what does it mean to be successful? Does it have to be financially successful? Does it have to target a specific audience? Maybe that is maybe you don't want to make money, you just want to target a specific audience. And
it's subjective as well, right?
Extremely subjective. And so I really don't think I'm not going to say we're never going to get there. I mean, the advances we're talking about here are only over the last decade. Like a decade ago, none of this was barely possible, and now we're even talking about it. So what's going to happen in the next decade? That's really unpredictable. But what is going to be possible is, for instance, in text generation. One example that I could see be very useful is, for instance, in games. There's a lot of time spent in creating games is creating the assets and creating the storylines. And when pitching deep story, we've been approached quite a bit by gaming companies who said, can you make this work for our games? Because we spend so much time writing small dialogues for like non-player characters. Like when you walk into a bar and there's a bartender and he just says something to you, something random, that has to make sense. Now, that dialogue could be perfectly generated by an AI. Could be just taking into account what you've played, could take into account the setting, and generate a line for that person to say that makes sense. So that's like one example where the actual message being delivered is it's not going to be Oscar-worthy, but that's an automation of a task that now takes incredible time for these content creators, where they could be spending their time actually developing the narrative that matters in the story instead.
No, and I think this kind of a great example. And you know, if we think about a video game like Red Dead Redemption 2, right, which took I think it was like around 8 years and 1,200 actors and 500,000 lines of recorded dialogue. So that's not scalable, right? But there are so many creative tasks in there. So how do you make that kind of thing scalable? And I think they're kind of massive challenges. I think Dave, I think everyone's hit on this point as well already about, and we're going to get a tiny bit technical in a moment. But we also need a loss function, right? We need a way of measuring creativity, and we are also thinking like 20 years ahead, right? So let's have big horizons. So, how do we kind of gauge whether or not and coming back to reinforcement learning or loss functions in general. So how do we, so Chanuki too, so how do we know whether or not we've actually done a good job in your example case where we're trying to present something to someone which is the product they want? So how do we?
Yeah. Oh, I'll tell you, there is a flaw in my algorithm. So if I gave the neural network a picture of an alien landscape, it would have no idea how to rate that. And this is a problem. So the way technically it works, we're actually training it with labeled data. And this is, I think, the massive problem we have at the moment with creativity. And that's why I'm saying that once a neural network creates something new, it can't tell whether it's beautiful. And I think what's really extraordinary about human beings is that we can relate two things that are seemingly completely different and still kind of put connections together and understand a beauty in something. So even, a mathematical formula can be beautiful. That's just our brain just trying to find a new way of understanding beauty. Now, neural networks can't do that, and we can't even optimize a neural network currently to be able to do that because they're so dependent at the moment with labeled data, or even with reinforcement learning, you're still sending signals because it's playing a game, it's winning. So if the signals aren't, I think it's because we don't really understand how humans are creative and how humans kind of make understanding of beauty. I think until we can understand that, I think we're just really, really far away from how do you program that? How do you program something you don't actually quite understand?
Yeah, so loss functions are kind of an interesting thing. And
do you want to kind of describe the terminology a little bit as well, Dave? I mean, you might be a good person to kind of, what are we kind of meaning here? What are we?
So you introduced it.
Sorry.
So yeah, basically when if you've got a data-driven solution, you are trying to get your kind of input to match your output, or your input to match a label based on an example where you've got ground truth. So you know what the input is, you know what the description is, and you've got to create a difference between what the system is predicting and what the kind of ground truth is. And that creates a difference, a distance measure, an error. You then actually have to feed that back through the network in kind of typical situations. I mean, there are networks that vary, but typically create some kind of function of that to propagate back through the network that changes all the structure, the weights and the kind of parameters within the network, so that you drive your network towards that solution. So that's what the kind of loss function is.
So there's an implication that we need examples then of what we mean by the thing we want to create, which is good and bad. And
yeah. So I mean, just to give you an example, the things I mentioned before, if you're looking at kind of, if you're trying to get something, the input to be the same as the output, so these things are called autoencoders, and that's kind of obvious because you've got an image, let's say it's an image, and you've got an output image, and you just can measure the difference on each pixel between them, so that's kind of relatively easy. The stuff that we do with compression, well, we're trying to optimize, not from a kind of distortion, but to take into account aspects of the human visual system where you're building kind of perceptual aspects into that, and that's not kind of emotion or engagement or anything like that. It's simply the quality of in our case, the video or the image signal. So you've got perceptual kind of issues that go on that we understand a little bit about, and we can build those into kind of loss functions like masking and things like that. So that's kind of, it's not easy at all. It's kind of difficult, but it's the kind of easy end of things. Now, if you look at kind of creativity in a general sense, there's stuff that you really can't kind of bottle or you can't describe. The subtleties of emotion, engagement, immersion. We really don't understand those kind of processes and the way the kind of cerebral cortex works and all the aspects of it. I mean, even the kind of, if you just take vision, which is my area, roughly half the cortical matter is dedicated in some way or other to kind of visual processing. And there are kind of 20 or so centers of visual processing that people know light up when you kind of show them different things. But actually, this little outcrop called the eyeball and the retina, which is the bit of the human brain on the kind of stalk, that we see, we don't even understand that, let alone the other kind of, 50 billion neurons that are kind of going on in the background and firing away. So, I mean, capturing that and then putting that into a function that you can kind of have all these mathematical properties is kind of, is way out there. We just can't bottle it. What we are doing is we can start to understand kind of proxies for engagement. We can certainly kind of create algorithms or metrics that can measure quality of the video, and by that I just mean how kind of sharp it is or how kind of clear it is. In terms of immersion engagement, we are starting to measure things, or be able to measure kind of biometrics and kind of physiological responses and things like that allow us to on a moment-by-moment basis, kind of understand how people are engaging. Now, that's obviously a very, somebody mentioned, subjective, very, very subjective thing, but you can then look at kind of groups. So, it comes back to how you can characterize that in a loss function. Or maybe, if you look at the way the kind of human learns, it's kind of over a very long sort of set of experiences, a long period. And I kind of think sometimes you've got for example, just on the internet kind of stream video, between us we consume around about 3 zettabytes, 10 to the 23 bytes per year. Now that's an awful lot of information we're consuming. If in somehow, we all decide we're going to have implants that measure all these things, we can then kind of build that into this kind of bigger kind of engagement monitoring, and the whole, maybe you start to get different metrics for IMDb and kind of things like that. So, I mean, maybe there's some kind of glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel, but actually, it's so hugely impossible. It's so hugely difficult to do kind of currently. So I think,
I think where we're kind of moving towards in the discussion then as well is then therefore the idea that it's kind of the elephant in the room a little bit. I mean, we're talking about creativity in AI, but we're already saying that you need examples, you need to be able to define something mathematically, which kind of seems a bit counterintuitive to the kind of idea of philosophy about creativity anyway. So we're kind of wrestling with these things, right? And I think we've already seen some good examples today of, I think there are implications of this in terms of creativity. So if we think about the fact that the AI that we're creating, we've seen great examples of AIs that can generate paintings. But they're given examples of a certain type of painting, and then they'll generate more paintings which are like that. Okay. Now, coming back to the Scriptbook example, and also Chanuki's example, if I think there's a danger that we can bias the creativity of the algorithm, right, that we're training. So if you say, so your algorithm might say, I'll tell you how good a script is and how much money potentially can make you or something. And now if you end up commissioning all the scripts where your algorithm says, this is going to make you money, what you end up doing is creating things over time, which there's probably a trend. You probably find that everything you generate has certain shared properties. So I guess there's a kind of, the question then would be, are you limiting creativity? So in that example, and then in general, are we actually limiting creativity by having algorithms which are biased in a certain way?
Yeah, okay, so this is a very common question that we get. And it's so common that we wrote a blog post about it. So if anyone is not satisfied with my answer, you can go on the internet and read the blog post. So the short answer in the beginning now is that something that people wonder is, okay, is your AI only going to recommend me to make the next Spider-Man, Terminator, the blockbuster movies? And the answer to that, we looked at it, it's no, it doesn't. Because if you look at financial viability, sure, these blockbusters make a lot of movies, make a lot of money, but they're also very risky. In a sense, they can also lose you a lot of money. And there's a lot of smaller budget movies that don't make as much in like the absolute number, but are profitable. And so our AI will detect those. Those are also positive cases. It's not just that the blockbusters are the only movies making money. Okay. And then to come to the other point is the point of a feedback loop, right? Our AI system suggests to make these types of movies. These types of movies are going to be made, and they're going to feed back into the system, and maybe it's going to keep repeating the same movies over and over and over. But you have to keep in mind that at the end of that loop, there is an audience, and the audience wants to watch certain types of movies. If they keep watching those movies, then sure, there will be a feedback loop, but that also means that the people actually want to watch that content. If you keep putting out movies that people don't want to watch, right, then those movies are not going to make any money. And that feedback is going to be a negative feedback to the AI. And it's going to be like, okay, I'm no longer going to I need to start making some other movies because people clearly don't want to see this content anymore.
So your loss function is actually, in that case, the viewer.
Yeah, the viewer is somewhere in the viewer is the target that we're projecting to in the loss function. And if that changes, then the loss function's value is going to change, and it's going to direct the AI in a different direction.
So I guess the implication is then, I kind of move across. So the implication is that to overcome bias, we're coming back to the idea that a human in the loop is still, in our forecast future, the human in the loop, whether it's the creative person, whether it's an audience, can help address the bias. I don't know.
Well, yeah, absolutely. If we're creating things for human consumption, then the human has to be in the loop. And if you want to write a good algorithm, the worst thing you could do is just write the algorithm, just let it run and not touch it ever again. That's just terrible because we change and we evolve. And algorithms need to change and evolve. So actually, and as long as we're making things for humans, we need to check in all the time and check the feedback. And in some ways, you can also use humans as inspirational for the AI. So say the photo book idea, so we're trying to create these like nice little layouts. At some point, we'll run out of ideas from our current pool, but of course, humans are incredibly creative. They'll come up with another idea. We can say, hey, let's program that in. They've thought about how about taking these vibrant images. So I think it's really interesting what you can do when the human is actually in the loop.
Yeah, and I think that kind of, yeah, I think that kind of reflects as well the kind of the way that we can maybe automate some tasks as well, potentially with, you know, with AI. We can have like the human can be there, just making them more creative and productive. I mean, just then kind of like just on the AI a little bit again, just to run this bit off. I mean, turn to Dave as well. Then I mean, coming back to the idea that, you know, how do we like, just for the philosophical point of view, how can we, if we ever want to remove then the human from this, let's say that's our challenge, you know, so we've got something which is really intelligent, it can reason, which we can't do yet with AI. You know, we can't reason about things independently. How about some sort of creative Turing test? I mean, any kind of, you know, maybe I'll open it up. Any ideas on, you know, so a Turing test for AI, we can kind of fool a human into thinking it's chatting to an AI or something. So do we need as a community to create a Turing test for creative industries where you could, you know, can you tell whether something is, should we anonymize entries for competitions for art or something? I mean, it's kind of, is that then we'll reach the point? Is that how we reach the point where we agree this is creative?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Turing test doesn't necessarily kind of take on board how much the human has been in the loop. And I think, I mean, I can't remember the details of it, but there was some time ago, there was a kind of an interview panel with one of the people was generated by AI based on some kind of historical debate or something. I don't know if you guys remember this.
IBM, I think.
It was IBM, I think, were doing. I can't remember what the topic was, but on the whole, there were it was like kind of, I don't know, 20 minutes or half an hour or something. And there were, you know, for most of it, people were pretty convinced. I'm not sure it was done exactly as a Turing test, but, you know, the same principle, people were pretty convinced. There were a couple of examples where it kind of said stupid things, and I can't remember why people in the audience didn't realize it was, whether there was a curtain in front of this person or something. I can't remember the details. Probably other people do, but so I think that kind of thing does happen. And, you know, and again, it all relies on, you know, unless the machine is kind of going out there searching for stuff, and it comes back to things like, you know, kind of monkeys and Shakespeare, and the like. You know, you can feed an AI system all of Shakespeare's writing and other contemporary information. Is it going to produce something as good as Shakespeare? Pretty unlikely, I think. You know, how do you actually measure?
How would we know where we've got to that point as well? I think that's the kind of. I think that's the.
Yeah, but even with humans, we can't kind of come up with a Turing test for creativity because we decide as a society what's, you know, creative and what we love, and it's evolving and changing. So if we can't do it for humans, I'm sure we can actually do it for AI, and I guess that's why it's quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to kind of there are kind of two areas that I just want to quickly cover before we finish. But before we, and one of them is about so you can have a think. One of them is about how, you know, inclusivity and diversity is affected by AI. Another one is about kind of threats and opportunities. But before that, I just want to kind of look through and see any kind of questions. One question which has come up is around, if I can find it, the idea of kind of IP as well, and kind of ownership. Actually, someone's asked the question: if someone makes a deep fake of me, do I own the copyright of the fake? But it depends, I guess, whether the images that it's being created on were owned. Who owned the images in the first place? I don't know. Yeah,
but there's issues as well, isn't there, around kind of not just that IP, but causing offence. You know, if you're recreating somebody who's died a while ago, and you're creating a story around them, then one has to be careful about those types of things.
But it is actually, so this is actually quite, I think this is an important area. I mean, coming back to the point earlier on as well about, you know, the interpolation essentially of you know, the generative models are interpolating somehow, some way. So what we're doing is we're generating judgments or opinions or data or images from existing data. So I guess there's a question about IP inherent in that, which is probably super sticky. And there actually one related thing we've come across recently is if you train a tool based on movie footage in a visual effects company and you don't own that footage, do you have the rights to share that tool? I don't know, any thoughts on that, not specifically for that example, but any thoughts on the training and the...
Yeah, this is a very complicated thing. I think the question of ownership is a very political one, and also has to be, I mean, law has to be taken into account there, because if you are going to say that AIs can own certain pictures or certain movies, then there's also a certain responsibility attached. What if that is indeed a violation of some law? Is then the AI responsible for that violation? That can't possibly be the case. So in those cases, we probably going to have to create new laws, new new rules that dictate that when you use a system or an AI to create certain content, and that content makes or breaks a law, then you are the one responsible. You can't possibly blame a machine for doing that, because there's nothing you can do. You can't punish that machine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So accountability, yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, normally there's a company that's involved or a person that's involved in creating the algorithm. I mean, I think what gets tricky is, again, with the labeled data. So say, you take, some work from two different artists, and then you combine it, and then you create something new. Now, in that instance, who's actually gets the credit? So that's a tricky one, because actually, kind of everybody was involved in that one. So I don't know, maybe we have to rethink how we actually, credit people for their work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I don't have an answer. I mean, even in the sort of things that I do in my day job, in terms of using kind of visual content, cinema type content for whoever to kind of train perceptually optimized kind of compression systems. Some of the data that's used sometimes is not owned by the company that you're operating, but actually there's so many stages removed from that data to the end product that, I've never heard of anybody challenging it, but potentially I guess they could.
I think I want to pick up another question as well, and because it also relates to one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is about bias. The question was, what most concerns you about AI's tendency to reflect biases and prejudice from its data sources? And I think this is an interesting one, because we've kind of establishing that right now, at least, our AI is trained on data and it's reflecting the data. And we know that data has bias, it has inclusivity, it can discriminate. So what are the implications of that if we're using AI to generate movies, images, scripts, make opinions about things for creativity? How does that affect the shift in what we're creating if we're using AI?
I can try to answer that. I can try to reflect on Scriptbook itself. I mean, we have this. Every AI company has the same issue. Once you have a data set, what is the bias? So I think there's a certain responsibility for the data scientists, for the people creating the AIs, to do a best effort of avoiding bias in the beginning in the data set. So, for instance, how we did that is we tried to collect as many scripts as we possibly could. I think we have scripts from 1970s to today, all possible genres that you can imagine. And we just try to, you have to try to make the distribution of your data set as accurately as possible, reflect the distribution of the real world. But then,
if the real world is also biased.
Yes, exactly. So you have to do a best effort. Now, anyone that tells you that they have a data set that is completely bias-free is either on the extreme edge case, or he's lying, or he doesn't know it. And so the second point I want to make is that we have to probably just assume that our data is biased. And knowing that, for instance, in our case, we started collecting these scripts, and it just turned out that the US market, the American market, was much more open with their data than the European market was. So initially we started out collecting all possible scripts that we could, and what ended up was the data set was American biased, because that's just the way the data was available. But if we know that, okay, just knowing that fact and realizing it is a very important step in interpreting the results that come out of the system. Okay? And then a last point I want to make is that AI can actually help us in detecting the biases in our own data sets that we're collecting. So for instance, one of the things that we can do in scripts is we can extract all the characters, extract the males and the females, count how much they interact, and actually detect gender bias in the scripted content. Okay, and therefore AI data sets are vulnerable to bias, but they can also help us to alleviate it.
Cool. Any other? Okay, so I'm looking at the clock, and but I know so we're kind of going to wind down a little bit. So I think a good place to kind of end to kind of wrap up the discussion. I think a lot of the questions, by the way, that have come in have been reflecting a lot of the things we've already talked about. So I'm hoping that we've kind of covered a lot of, or we can talk over coffee. If anyone had any burning questions, you can talk to the panel. The thing I want to kind of finish on a little bit then is kind of, you know, threats and opportunities of AI. I mean, so we are, so we're in a place now where we're already using AI, but again, looking to the future, I'm thinking 10, 20 years. What do we see as, we've already talked about opportunities, so maybe actually we could start with kind of any potential threats. Should we feel threatened? Should creative people feel threatened by generative models and GANs and I'll kind of start, I'll open it up, but I kind of want to start either Dave or Chanuki. Chanuki?
So the biggest threats.
Any kind of...
well, I mean, it's what I was talking about before. So kind of that we get so carried away with the algorithms because they can actually do so much that we do everything for somebody. And the thing is, like, so already AI is taking away a lot of the jobs away. I would find it of shame if it took a lot of creative jobs away because it's fun being creative. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of, so I think it's great when AI takes away mundane jobs that are just dull to do, then leaves us time to do stuff that's creative. So the biggest threat, I think, is mainly that it's going to take away some joy in our lives. And I think we need to really think about what we want to invest our algorithms in. And if we are going to invest in algorithms to do creativity, to take over creativity, how are we going to do that which still keeps the joy in our work still there? So it's a little bit tricky to get one's head around, but that's the kind of thing that I think is the danger, really.
So, I mean, we've already talked about bias and unbalanced kind of worlds and things like that. So, as has already been said, the idea of kind of understanding the fact that a data set is biased, or the availability of images or information, whatever it is biased, therefore there are going to be underrepresented kind of groups or individuals or whatever, and kind of taking steps to go to solve that problem through kind of augmenting data, or perhaps has been hinted at using AI techniques to do that. I mean, the whole idea that an AI system, is not perfect, and we need to deal with kind of errors, and we need to deal with kind of inconsistencies, which are inevitably going to happen. Therefore, you think, well, how's that going to work? If your AI system is in a kind of target acquisition system, then you probably want to have some human checks and balances, and that's the way it works. But equally, if you're creating content, and we've seen kind of films and things that have been created largely through kind of examples fed in and actors fed in, and they're kind of interesting, and they win prizes. Would you want to watch them more than once? Well, maybe from an academic point of view, you might. You can't invert these systems. You can't really see what they're doing. You can try to extract things out of them, but that kind of uncertainty in terms of what's creating the errors and what's creating the kind of good bits is still an area of interest. And of course, there's a lot of examples out there where with the errors or the biases cause kind of knock-on effects in terms of reputation of companies or individuals and things. So there are a lot of threats, I think, in that area as well.
And I think that we've kind of already, and you've mentioned some good examples. I mean, your company's testament to the fact that people are already kind of saying, I have a task. It's maybe, the video game example, the narrative example is just, is this a good script, is it a bad script? It's already, I guess it's still not replaced, it's kind of maybe empowering people as well. It's kind of increasing productivity as well, isn't it? So, do we think that really the ideal place is that maybe it's just kind of, we'll just end up being more creative. There'll be more, if I'm an engineer, I could have the creative bit, done for me. Is that a kind of feature that we kind of...
definitely like the short-term future, is that AI is just going to empower our own creativity. The question then becomes, okay, maybe in 10 years we do crack our mind and we know how it all works and we can make an AI that is conscious. That's a whole different question maybe. Yeah. But then at this point, the way it's evolving right now, I don't see AI as a threat to our creativity. It's only going to empower it.
So, okay, so I'll just ask one more thing then, and it's just kind of then, in terms of holy grails, then, and it's kind of rounding this off. So, give me each one the biggest challenge. So, what is the one thing that it'll not be able to do in 20 years' time?
20 years time.
20.
Well, 10.
That's
I think 20 years ahead. I'm thinking 20 years ahead. That's what I think. I mean, I think to myself, what will Red Dead Redemption 20 look like? Like, how amazing will that be? I mean, that's the kind of mindset, I think. So what's the biggest challenge then? What do you think the holy grail is then for a creative AI? So just to kind of, and that can be maybe a challenge that we can go off and think about. So
one thing that I don't think AI is ever going to do is it's going to define its own loss function and basically decide on its own that it has an own agenda and an own will.
Okay.
And Terminator-style Skynet and eradicate the human race. Okay. All voluntarily out of itself.
Right, okay.
The big danger with AI is not AI itself. It is humans using the AI to do bad. Okay. So I don't think we should be fearing the AI in itself, and I don't think that's ever going to happen.
And for a forecasted future, that's the... Okay.
So maybe in 20 years' time, we can have an AI that actually can create something beautiful that's new. But the shame is that it probably will look at it and not be emotionally moved. And that's the problem I think we're going to have.
Right, so Steve, last word?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we probably all agree that machine learning is not the same as human learning. Machines kind of learn the space that they're provided with. How they get it is another issue, whereas the kind of human is predicting, it's building kind of, it's expect the unexpected, it's asking the what-if questions and things that machines are kind of not capable of doing. Yet, I mean, it's the whole kind of lifetime experience. I mean, Jan LeCun gives a great example of kind of self-supervised learning, where you show I'm not sure what the ages are, a young baby, a car floating in the air, and it's kind of thinking, okay, so what? No surprises there. Nobody teaches it gravity or the kind of way the world works, but a few years later it understands gravity. You show it a car floating in the air, and the baby is kind of surprised that's not right. So, that whole kind of experiential learning, self-supervised learning is somewhere, and there's a lot of research effort in that area. I mean, the other thing I ought to kind of touch on, because we haven't, it's not about the creativity, but it's about the kind of complexity of doing all of these things. And, a lot of these things are going to be going on, in kind of cloud or data centers and things. And the kind of elephant in the room is, a huge amount of the world's power is being used. I think it's about 3% currently is kind of consumed in data centers. And my friends at Facebook kind of have all these predictions, which I think are public. Well, I know they're public because they've been presented. Extrapolating in terms of population and usage and things, and those kind of numbers are going up very, very significantly. So there's a kind of big issue there. We're talking about all these kind of massive, huge data-driven kind of learning experiences. We need to be cognizant of the kind of complexity issues there. So I think the whole kind of, if we're going to develop this Internet of Experiences type kind of model in the future, and creative content, then, we need to be cognizant of the complexity, but we need to have different learning systems that are perhaps a little bit closer to humans, because we're certainly not there yet. Okay.
Well, on that note, thanks everyone. Whatever happens, I'm looking forward to sitting back and just seeing in 20 years' time what the new video games and movies and things are anyway. So I'll just continue to enjoy it and tinker away with training networks or something. But thanks to the panel again, and thanks everyone. And I think I'll hand you back over to Gemma, and thanks a lot.